He is on the telephone with us, but he is able to answer your question if you would like to call. Only one line available today, 479-1160, if you have a question for Bob Pollock. And we'll tell both you and Bob that if you lose us, just call back because sometimes those conference call things don't work absolutely to perfection. But you can give Bob a call. Take a shot at it at 479-1160. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm just lovely, and watching this rain coming down today, and I guess it came at a good time because it was starting to get pretty dry, wasn't it?
Well, if you dig a hole in the ground, you'd still find moisture in there, but we've never really, it's kind of interesting, there are spots that normally dry out by now, wet spots, that have never dried out yet this year. So there's moisture there, and of course then that leads to potential other problems when you get all those wet spots and that excessive moisture, and we tend to run into more disease issues, and that's pretty much what we're seeing around the state is just an increased incidence of the septorial leaf spot and the early blight on tomatoes, and then of course you get into the vine crops, and then we've got downy mildew, and that's a disease that gets on cucumbers especially, and then but it will make what they call angular spots on the leaves, and then those spots will grow together and the leaves will go, but that'll shorten the life of the whole planting.
Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we do have a caller this morning.
Okay,
let's check in. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you guys doing?
All right. Do you have a question for Bob?
Yeah, I do. I heard Bob talking about the blight. As a matter of fact, I think it was last week, and he said that he hadn't had any reports of blight. I think I might have a blight, but it's a very slow-moving blight. It started like at one end of the garden at the bottom of the tomato plants and worked its way up, and it's not even clearly across the garden yet. It's been taking about a month to do this, but the tomatoes seem to be still okay. It's just the plants seem to be dying from the bottom up. But my problem is that my tomatoes are developing little, like caverns in them, little, not all of them, just a few, like about half the size of a dime's diameter, and they're like little holes. And I wondered, is that some kind of bug or is that just some kind of blight?
If it's pretty much just a nice little circle, like you took your finger and just pressed into the surface of the fruit, and it kind of made a round dish, just a depression in there, and that'll turn black. That's another fungal disease which we're more prone to get in the weather that we've been having, and it's called anthracnose. Nasty sounding name, but that will cause these spots to develop on the side of the fruit, and it's usually as they're ripening too, is when that tends to happen.
Yeah, is there anything I can do about it?
Once you can prevent it. Yeah, once that's there, you can't do anything about it. Now, a lot of times, you'll still be able to harvest that fruit and cut that spot out and still have some tomato to use. Because a lot of times, you might only have one or two of those spots on a given tomato unless it really gets bad.
And it doesn't get all the either, it just gets a few.
Yeah, and that's what that is, but it's caused by a fungus, definitely promoted in the type of weather conditions that we have. So,
can he spray?
And again,
Bob, can he spray?
You've got to prevent that. Yes, you can. So there are fungicides, both organic and conventional materials that can be used to help prevent that. Once the spot's there, once the infection's there, it's there. However, you can prevent further infections from occurring by putting on a fungicide, every 7 to 10 days. if we continue this kind of weather patterns.
Is what is happening to the plants themselves, does that sound like a blight to you?
Yes, and it's probably early blight, which is very common. That's a fungal disease that overwinters in our area, and so it makes its spores during the growing season, and then those overwinter in the garden and on the plant debris, and then they're available to then shoot out new spores and make infections when there's susceptible plants there. So that's very common. We rarely have a year that we don't have early blight going around.
Okay,
so yes,
very much, Bob.
And you're right, Joe. That's slow. It comes slowly, and usually on the older leaves at the base of the plant, works its way up. Most of the time, with that particular fungal disease, you're still going to get fruit, and you'll still have good fruit. It just affects the leaves much more than it does the fruit, although it can also affect the fruit.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Yeah, and that's that's another one of those. Again, just any of these fungal diseases, we've got to prevent them. With early blight, you can wait until you get some of that before you do anything, or you can just play it out. And if we get into drier weather patterns and more sunny conditions, we're going to see less incident of it. But like with the anthracnose, once those infections are there, it's there. So again, we've got to prevent diseases from causing infections. Is about how it works.
All right, Bob,
it's a lot easier when you're trying to do an integrated pest management approach, where you're trying to monitor things, and monitoring is very important in what we call integrated pest management. And really, it's important no matter what you're trying to do. You just keep an eye on things, and you try to catch things before they develop too far.
Yeah. Hey, I want to ask you a question about
go ahead.
About Japanese beetles and the powders that you put on your plants, your grapes, and other plants that do bear fruit that you eat, and the wisdom of powdering, and how long you need to wait, and that whole issue. Is it safe to put powder on plants that are going to bear fruit that you're going to eat, and what must we do then to make sure that stuff is not being ingested?
Right. So with whatever powder you're going to apply, it needs to be labeled for that use. So we would, if we're selecting, if our problem's Japanese beetles and we're selecting an insecticide to control them, we want to make sure it's labeled to control that insect, and we also want to make sure it's labeled to be used on the crop that we're applying it to, because that does vary. So just because something will kill Japanese beetles on a grapevine or an ornamental shrub or tree doesn't mean that it's labeled for using on certain vegetable plants.
Okay.
So you got to go look at the label and make sure that both the insect and the plant is labeled. And then once we do that, we say, okay, this is labeled for both these uses. Then we look on a little closer at the label and see if there's any restrictions as to how many days before harvest we can apply that. And that varies all over the board. So say it's 7 days for a particular product. On a particular crop, you can go from one crop, one vegetable, to another vegetable, and it might only be 3 days. So it varies between the crop that you're applying it to. And some products are 0 days to harvest, and others are 2 days or 3 days or 1 day. So again, that information is on the label of whatever product you're going to use.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to do a little reading. Sometimes the print can be fine print, but on some of these labels on smaller containers, the print's pretty small. But nonetheless, that is always listed on the label, and it might say days to harvest or harvest interval or a couple different terms used for that, but it'll give you a number of days.
Right.
And
Very
that's
good.
how that works.
All righty. And obviously, if something is covered over by more leaves, like you get that heavy leafing on a grapevine, the powder can linger for a while on a plant. So the washing is the important thing, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that will help. And every material breaks down differently. Some things are, as soon as you apply it, the bacteria and fungi and the sun, as well as rain, can all interact to start the process of breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
So these things are only good for a certain number of days or weeks, depending on the individual chemical structure of whatever it is. So that all varies. Normally, if we get, an inch, 2 inches of rainfall, and we just applied a material, especially if you're using a dust, that will, it will dissolve and maybe washed off the plant.
Yeah.
So then you've got to go back in and reapply. So that's sometimes an advantage where you're using dust and they can just be physically washed off the plant, versus using something you mix up in water and spray on, and then it dries on there. Those tend to last longer and stick on the plant longer than, say, a dust would.
All righty. Hey, we got to go. Thank you, Bob.
Hey, you are welcome.
It's WCCS.
Have a good day.